The gavel slammed down with a crack that echoed like a gunshot through the suffocating silence of courtroom 302. Judge Harlan Brooks leaned over his mahogany bench, his face flushed with a toxic mix of amusement and disdain. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger at the woman standing calmly before him. "I suggest you look for the janitorial closet, madam," he sneered, his voice booming for the entire gallery to hear. The defendants' benches were for criminals, not for the help who had gotten lost. The courtroom erupted in laughter. Brooks smirked, feeling invincible. He had no idea that the woman he had just humiliated wasn't a janitor, nor a defendant. She was the one woman in the entire country with the power to end his career with a single phone call, and she was currently recording every word he said. The rain in Philadelphia was relentless. A gray sheet of water that turned the city's grime into a slick, treacherous varnish. Inside the Philadelphia County Criminal Justice Center, the air hung thick with the smell of wet wool, stale coffee, and despair. It was a place where dreams went to die, usually strangled by bureaucracy or crushed by the weight of a plea deal nobody wanted to take. Judge Harlan Brooks loved it here. He wore his authority like a suit of armor, specifically a custom-tailored Italian suit hidden beneath his flowing black robes. He had a reputation, one he cultivated carefully. To the wealthy partners at firms like Sidley Austin or Kirkland & Ellis, he was tough but fair. To the public defenders and the endless stream of minority defendants who shuffled through his doors, he was the butcher of South Philadelphia. He was late, a power move he executed to remind the court officers, the stenographer, and the trembling lawyers that their time belonged to him. "All rise!" The bailiff, a heavy-set man named Officer Hernandez, bellowed as Brooks swept into the room. Brooks sat, adjusted his glasses, and looked out at the sea of faces. It was the usual docket: a few DUIs, a petty theft, a domestic dispute. Boring. He craved the high-profile cases, the ones that got his name in the Inquirer. But for now, he would entertain himself by making life miserable for the ill-prepared. The doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. A woman walked in. She was African-American with skin the color of deep mahogany and hair pulled back into a severe, elegant bun. She wore a simple charcoal trench coat that was soaked through, dripping onto the linoleum floor. Underneath, a glimpse of a modest navy blouse was visible. She carried no briefcase, only a slightly battered leather portfolio. She didn't rush. She walked with a measured, rhythmic cadence, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She moved past the gallery benches, past the bar that separated the public from the legal professionals, and stood near the defense table. Brooks looked up from his docket, annoyed by the movement. He squinted. He didn't recognize her. She wasn't one of the regulars. She wasn't a flashy private attorney, and she didn't have the harried, exhausted look of a public defender. To Brooks's prejudiced eye, she looked out of place, and in Harlan Brooks's court, being out of place was an offense punishable by humiliation. "Excuse me?" Brooks's voice cut through the low murmur of the room. The woman stopped. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and unsettlingly calm. "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice was low, smooth, and possessed a diction that hinted at an expensive education. But Brooks wasn't listening to her tone. He was looking at her coat. "The gallery is behind the bar, madam," Brooks said, gesturing dismissively with his pen. "If you are here to support a family member, take a seat in the back. You are disrupting my court." The woman didn't move. "I am not here to support a family member, Your Honor. I am here to observe the proceedings regarding the People versus Jamal Thompson." Brooks paused. Jamal Thompson. That was the third case on the docket, a minor drug possession charge that Brooks intended to use to make an example of the youth. You're here to observe? Brooks let out a short, dry laugh. He leaned back in his leather chair. Are you a social worker? A concerned auntie? I am an interested party, she said simply. Brooks's eyes narrowed. He hated vagueness. It felt like defiance. Well, interested party. In this courtroom, lawyers and defendants stand before the bench. Spectators sit in the back. Unless you are representing Mr. Thompson, which, looking at the state of that coat, I highly doubt. Move. A ripple of nervous tittering went through the gallery. The lawyers waiting for their cases looked down at their shoes, terrified to draw Brooks's fire. The woman remained rooted to the spot. She slowly unbuttoned her wet trench coat. She revealed a tailored navy suit underneath. It was high quality but understated. No flash. I am an attorney, Your Honor, she said. Brooks raised his eyebrows theatrically. Oh, an attorney? You're not on the record and you're certainly late. I am not the attorney of record for this case, she clarified. I am simply observing the conduct of the court. Brooks bristled. The word conduct triggered him. It sounded like oversight, and Harlan Brooks did not like being overseen. He decided right then and there that he was going to break her. He was going to make her wish she had stayed out of his courtroom. Observing the conduct, Brooks repeated, mocking her cadence. Let me guess, you're from one of those legal aid clinics, the ones who think they can waltz in here and tell me how to interpret the law because they read a pamphlet once. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the court reporter, a young woman named Emily, who looked terrified. Emily, are you getting this? We have a visitor who thinks she can audit my courtroom. He turned back to the woman. What is your name? My name is Denise, she said. Just Denise, Brooks sneered. Like the singer? Or do you have a surname, counselor? Harper. No, Caldwell, she said. Denise Harper. The name meant nothing to him. It sounded generic, common. Well, Ms. Harper, Brooks said, emphasizing the Ms. with dripping condescension. Here is a lesson in conduct for you. In my courtroom, you do not approach the bench unless called. I yelled, you do not stand inside the well unless you have an appearance on file. And you certainly do not come in here looking like you just walked off a bus from South Philadelphia, dripping water on my floor, and expect to be treated like a partner at Scadden. The insult was gross, racial, and classist. The courtroom went silent. This was crossing a line even for Brooks. Denise Harper didn't flinch. She didn't blush. She didn't look down. She simply reached into her portfolio and pulled out a notepad. Noted, she said. Brooks's face turned a shade of violet. Noted. You don't note me, madam. You obey me. He slammed his gavel. Bailiff, escort Ms. Harper to the back row. If she speaks again, or if she writes anything down that I find distracting, throw her out. Officer Hernandez hesitated. He had been a bailiff for years. He had an instinct for people. And something about Denise Harper, the way she held her head, the steel in her spine, made his stomach turn. She didn't look like a nuisance. She looked like a predator waiting to strike. Judge, Hernandez started it, his voice low. Now, Hernandez, Brooks barked. Hernandez sighed and approached Denise. Ma'am, please. Denise looked at the officer. Her eyes softened just a fraction. It's all right, officer. I will sit. She turned and walked to the very back row of the gallery. Sitting alone on the hardwood bench, she opened her notepad. She clicked her pen. Brooks watched her go, feeling a surge of triumph. He had put her in her place. He adjusted his robes, feeling the adrenaline of the bully. Next case, he shouted. Bring out Jamal Thompson." He had no idea that Denise Harper had just written the date and time at the top of her page, followed by 3 words: Judicial Misconduct, Exhibit A. The case of Jamal Thompson was a tragedy of errors, the kind that happened every day in the American legal system. Jamal was skinny and terrified. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. He had been caught with a small amount of marijuana and an unregistered handgun in the glove box of a car that wasn't technically his. It belonged to his cousin. His public defender was a man named David Hale. Hale was a good man, but he was drowning. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Your Honor," Hale began, his voice strained, "we would like to request a continuance. I only received the discovery file this morning and denied." Brooks cut him off, not even looking up from his papers. "Mr. Thompson has been sitting in county. We are moving to plea or trial today." "But, Your Honor," Hale stammered, "without reviewing the dashcam footage, I can't advise my client on a plea. There are discrepancies in the police report regarding probable cause for the stop." Brooks took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Hale, don't waste my time with technicalities. The police found a weapon. Your client has a prior. Stop trying to play lawyer and start trying to save your client some years. I'm offering 5 years if he pleads right now. If we go to trial and he loses, I'll give him the max, 15. A gasp came from the gallery. It was Jamal's mother. She was weeping silently into a handkerchief. 5 years for a first-time gun possession with no violence involved was harsh. 15 was draconian. It was a bully tactic designed to force a plea, stripping the defendant of his right to a fair trial. In the back row, Denise Harper was writing furiously. Her pen moved across the page with precise, sharp strokes. Judge refuses continuance despite lack of discovery. Coerces plea with threat of maximum sentencing. Blatant violation of due process. Hale looked shocked. "Your Honor, the guidelines suggest probation to 2 years. He's employed. He's about to start community college. He's a thug with a gun." Brooks spat. "And I'm tired of cleaning up the streets for you bleeding hearts. Do you take the deal or do we pick a jury?" Hale turned to Jamal. The boy was shaking. "I didn't know the gun was there," Jamal whispered. "I can't let you take 5 years, Jamal," Hale whispered back. "But if we lose, I'm scared," Jamal said. Brooks leaned forward. "Clock is ticking, gentlemen. I have a lunch reservation at a steakhouse." At that moment, Denise Harper stood up. The sound of her movement was subtle, but in the tension of the room, it drew every eye. She didn't shout. She just stood there, a silent sentinel in the back of the room. Brooks' head snapped up. "Sit down. I am merely stretching my legs, Your Honor," Denise said, her voice carrying easily to the front. "Is there a law against standing in the public gallery?" "You are disrupting the proceedings," Brooks yelled, his face turning red again. He pointed at Hale. "And you, counselor. Control your gallery." "She's not with me, Your Honor," Hale said, confused. "I don't care who she's with." Brooks slammed his hand on the desk. "Mr. Thompson, how do you plead?" Jamal looked at the scary man in the black robe, then at the weeping woman in the back, and then at the tall, calm woman standing like a statue. Jamal stammered. "He pleads not guilty," Denise said. The room went deathly silent. Brooks slowly stood up. He looked like he was about to have a stroke. "What did you say?" Denise walked forward. She pushed through the swinging gate of the bar, ignoring the bailiff who reached for her. She walked right up to the defense table, standing next to the terrified public defender. "I said," Denise repeated, her voice hard as diamond, "he pleads not guilty. And furthermore, he requests a recusal of the presiding judge due to demonstrated bias, prosecutorial misconduct from the bench, and gross judicial incompetence. Hale dropped his file. The court reporter stopped typing, her mouth agape. Brooks was so shocked he couldn't speak. When he found his voice, it was a scream. "You are in contempt. You are going to jail. Hernandez, arrest this woman immediately." Hernandez moved forward, unclipping his handcuffs. "Ma'am, you have to come with me. You can't do this." Denise turned to Hernandez. She didn't resist, but she raised a hand. "Officer Hernandez, before you put those cuffs on me, I suggest you ask Judge Brooks if he recognizes the name Harper in the context of the Third Circuit Court of Appeals." Brooks froze. The Third Circuit, the federal court that sat directly above the district courts, the court that had the power to overturn decisions, sanction judges, and ruin careers. "I don't care if you're George Washington's ghost," Brooks roared, though a flicker of doubt appeared in his eyes. "You're practicing law without a license in my court. You're impersonating an attorney." "I am not impersonating anyone," Denise said calmly. She reached into her pocket. "Gun!" someone screamed. Hernandez drew his taser, but Denise didn't pull out a gun. She pulled out a small leather wallet. She flipped it open. A gold badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Next to it was an ID card. "I am Justice Denise Harper," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court and formerly of the Federal Court of Appeals." She tossed the badge onto the defense table. It landed with a heavy thud. "And Judge Brooks," she said, looking him dead in the eye, "I am here because I have received separate complaints about your conduct. I decided to come see for myself if the rumors of your tyranny were true." She gestured to the stunned courtroom. "I found that the complaints were understated." Brooks slumped back into his chair. His face went from red to a ghostly, sickly white. The air left the room. The lion's den had just been entered by the dragon. The silence in courtroom 302 was no longer the silence of submission. It was the silence of a bomb having just detonated, with everyone waiting for the dust to settle. Judge Harlan Brooks sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. The color had drained so completely from his face that his expensive foundation applied to hide. The broken capillaries on his cheeks stood out in stark orange relief. Officer Hernandez, the bailiff, slowly holstered his taser. He looked at the badge on the table, the gold eagle of the Supreme Court, and then at Denise. He took a step back, instinctively sensing a shift in the hierarchy of the universe. In a courtroom, the judge is God, but a Supreme Court justice, that is the God that gods pray to. "Justice Harper," Brooks finally choked out. His voice was a rasp stripped of its usual baritone boom. "That is correct," Denise said. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She turned to the court reporter. "Emily, is it? Please ensure the record reflects that I have identified myself and provided credentials. Do not stop typing." Emily nodded frantically, her fingers flying across the stenotype machine. Denise turned back to the bench. "Judge Brooks, you just attempted to arrest a judicial officer for observing a public hearing. You also attempted to coerce a plea from a young boy by threatening him with a sentence 3 times the recommended guideline. This is not a courtroom anymore. It is a shakedown." "Now wait just a minute," Brooks stammered, trying to find his footing. He forced a smile, a grotesque stretching of lips. "Justice, there has been a misunderstanding. I didn't recognize you. If I had known a colleague was present, if you had known I was powerful, you would have treated me with respect," Denise cut him off. "But you thought I was poor. You thought I was uneducated. And you thought I was weak. That is the problem, Harlan. You only respect power. And you are about to learn that you have significantly less of it than you think." She turned to David Hale, the public defender, who was still staring at her with wide, shocked eyes. "Counselor," she said gently, "your motion for a continuance." "Yes," Hale squeaked. "Renew it," she commanded. Hale swallowed hard. He straightened his spine. "Your Honor, I renew my motion for a continuance based on the arrival of new evidence and the need for judicial review." Denise looked at Brooks. She didn't say a word. She just raised a single eyebrow. Brooks looked at the gallery. He looked at the weeping mother. He looked at the badge. "Granted," Brooks whispered. "Motion granted. Case continued." "And the bail?" Denise asked. "Mr. Thompson has been held on a high bond for a nonviolent offense. He has no prior felonies. He is a student." Brooks gritted his teeth. He hated this. He hated being directed in his own castle. But he was trapped. Bail is modified. Released on recognizance. Jamal Thompson's knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of the table to hold himself up. "I can go home," he whispered. "You can go home, son," Denise said, her voice warm. Then she turned back to Brooks, the warmth vanishing instantly. "But you, Judge Brooks, you're not going anywhere. We have business. I have a docket," Brooks protested weakly. "I have cases." "Your docket is cleared," Denise said. "I have already spoken to the chief judge of the circuit court. He is sending a replacement judge down to handle the rest of the morning call. You and I are going to your chambers now." She didn't wait for him. She walked toward the door behind the bench, the door reserved for judges. Brooks stood up. He looked small in his robes. As he walked toward the door to follow her, a sound rose from the gallery. It started with Jamal's mother. She began to clap, just a slow, rhythmic clapping. Then the man next to her joined in. Then the other lawyers. Then the entire room. It wasn't a raucous cheer. It was an applause of relief, a validation. It was the sound of people who'd been bullied for years finally watching the bully get punched in the nose. Brooks hurried through the door, slamming it behind him to shut out the sound of his own defeat. Judge Brooks's chambers were opulent, a stark contrast to the grim, peeling paint of the courtroom and the holding cells. There were Persian rugs, mahogany bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes that looked like they had never been opened, and a crystal decanter of scotch on the sideboard. Framed photos covered the walls. Brooks shaking hands with the mayor. Brooks with the governor. Brooks on a yacht. Denise was standing by the window, looking out at the gray Philadelphia skyline. She didn't turn around when he entered. "Justice Harper," Brooks began, his voice taking on a tone of oily camaraderie. "Look, let me pour you a drink. We got off on the wrong foot. I admire your work. Truly, your opinion on State versus Henderson was brilliant." He was reaching for the decanter. "Sit down, Harlan," Denise said. She still hadn't turned around. "I really think we can discuss this like civilized—" "Sit down." The command was sharp, like a whip crack. Brooks sat in one of the guest chairs, leaving his own high-backed leather chair empty. Denise finally turned. She placed her portfolio on his desk. She began to unpack it. It wasn't just a notepad. She pulled out a thick file folder labeled Project Icarus. "Do you know why I'm here, Harlan?" "Really? Because you didn't like my tone," Brooks muttered. "Because I was rude to you." "Rudeness is a character flaw," Denise said. "I don't investigate character flaws. I investigate corruption." Brooks's eyes flickered. "Corruption? That's a heavy word. I'm a hard judge, sure. Maybe a little old school. But I am honest." Denise opened the file. She pulled out a photo. It was grainy, taken with a long-range lens. It showed Brooks sitting at a table in a dimly lit restaurant. Across from him was a man in a sharp suit, a man known as Jimmy the Shark, a notorious fixer for the city's construction unions. This was taken at a steakhouse in Center City, Denise said. You ordered the veal. Jimmy ordered the ribeye, and then Jimmy handed you an envelope. Brooks began to sweat profusely. That was a campaign contribution for my re-election. In cash? Denise asked. In a steakhouse? And curiously, you presided over a zoning dispute involving one of Jimmy's shell companies. You ruled in their favor, dismissing the environmental concerns of the local residents. You saved them millions. Brooks tried to stand up. This is entrapment. You have no right. I have every right, Denise said calmly. I am the chair of the Judicial Inquiry Board. We have been watching you. We have your bank records. We have the offshore accounts in the Caymans under your wife's maiden name. We know about the kickbacks from the private juvenile detention center in Bucks County. The blood drained from Brooks's face. The mention of the detention center was the nail in the coffin. That was the Kids for Cash scheme. Judges sending kids to private prisons in exchange for kickbacks from the facility owners. It was the lowest, vilest form of judicial corruption. You can't prove that, he whispered. I don't have to prove it to a jury today, Denise said. I just have to present it to the board, and then to the state's attorney. She leaned over the desk, her face inches from his. But here's where you made your fatal mistake, Harlan. You got comfortable. You thought you were untouchable because you had powerful friends. You forgot that your power comes from the people. And you forgot that in this state, the Supreme Court has the power of supervisory order. What? What do you want? Brooks asked. He looked like a broken man. Do you want me to resign? I'll resign. I'll take my pension and go to Florida. Denise laughed. It was a cold, hard sound. Resign and keep your pension, and let you slip away into a comfortable retirement while Jamal Thompson and hundreds like him carry the trauma of your courtroom for the rest of their lives? She shook her head. No, karma doesn't work like that. And neither do I. She pulled a document from the file. It was a formal complaint, already stamped and signed. This is a formal suspension order, effective immediately. You are stripped of your judicial powers pending a full hearing. You will leave this courthouse today, not as a judge, but as a private citizen under investigation. Brooks stared at the paper. You're ruining me. You ruined yourself, Denise said. I'm just the messenger. She packed up her files. She snapped the portfolio shut. Oh, and Harlan, one more thing. She walked to the door, then paused. That woman you laughed at, the janitor? Brooks looked up, tears of rage and fear in his eyes. She was a janitor, Denise said softly. My mother. She scrubbed floors in this very building for years so I could go to law school. She cleaned up after men like you. And every day she came home and told me, Denise, you make sure that when you get in that room, you don't just clean the floors. You clean the house. Denise smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. I'm cleaning the house, Harlan. She opened the door. Standing there was the chief judge of the circuit court, flanked by 2 state police officers. Harlan Brooks, the chief judge said, his face grim. Please come with us. Denise stepped aside as the officers moved in. She didn't stay to watch him get escorted out. She had work to do. She walked back out into the hallway where the air felt lighter, cleaner. But the story wasn't over. The takedown of Harlan Brooks was just the first domino. Denise knew that he was a symptom of a larger disease, a network of corruption that went deeper than one bad judge, and she had just kicked the hornet's nest. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. "You shouldn't have done that. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Denise stared at the screen. She didn't feel fear. She felt focus. She typed a reply. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The question is, do you know who I am?" She hit send, buttoned her trench coat, and walked toward the elevators. The war had just begun. The message on Denise's phone, "You have no idea who you're dealing with," burned in her mind as she sat in the back of her town car. The rain had stopped, leaving Philadelphia shimmering under the streetlights, deceptively peaceful. She wasn't heading home. She was heading to the one place where she could think without being watched. The University of Pennsylvania Law Library, where she maintained a private study carrel from her days as a professor. But across town, in the smoke-filled, mahogany-paneled back room of the Union League Club, the mood was far less contemplative. Alderman Victor Kane sat at the head of a long table. He was a man who didn't look like a politician. He looked like a boulder in a suit. He controlled the zoning permits for half of Philadelphia, which meant he controlled the money, and right now he was furious. "Brooks is out," Kane said, his voice a low rumble. "The woman Harper. She suspended him. She has the files." "The Icarus files?" asked a nervous man to his right. This was Ronald Blake, the CEO of Sentinel Corrections, the private company that ran the juvenile detention center in Bucks County. "Yes," Kane hissed. "If she connects the dots between Brooks's sentencing, your prison, and my zoning kickbacks, we are all going to federal prison." "She's just a judge," Blake said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We can pressure her, lean on her family." "Does she have kids?" Kane looked at Blake with disdain. "She's a Supreme Court justice, you idiot. She doesn't scare. She doesn't bend. We can't bribe her." "Then what do we do?" Kane took a slow sip of his whiskey. "If you can't buy the referee, and you can't scare the referee, you take the referee out of the game." Denise sat in the silent library, surrounded by stacks of paper. She had printed everything before leaving the courthouse. She was tracing the money. It was a classic kids for cash scheme, but on an industrial scale. Brooks would sentence teenagers to the Sentinel facility for minor infractions. Sentinel would bill the state per head. Sentinel would then donate to a shell corporation called Civic Future Fund, which just happened to be run by Alderman Kane's brother-in-law. It was millions of dollars built on the backs of children like Jamal Thompson. Suddenly, the lights in the library flickered. Denise looked up. The library was supposed to be secure. She heard a footstep in the stacks. Heavy, deliberate. Denise didn't panic. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. No signal. A jammer. She stood up, grabbing the heavy brass lamp from the desk. She wasn't frail. She was raised on the South Side before she was raised in the Ivy League. "I know you're there," she called out. Her voice didn't tremble. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the constitutional law section. He was dressed in black, wearing a maintenance uniform, but he moved like a soldier. He held a silenced pistol. "Justice Harper," the man said. "Please don't make this messy. Hand over the files." "You think the files are the only copy?" Denise asked, her grip tightening on the lamp. "I uploaded everything to the cloud. You kill me, and an email goes out to the FBI, the Inquirer, and the New York Times." The assassin hesitated. This wasn't in his briefing. He was told she was an old lady who would be terrified. "Check your phone," Denise bluffed. "Oh, wait. You can't. You jammed the signal." The man took a step forward, raising the gun. "I'll take my chances." Denise threw the lamp. It wasn't a frantic toss. It was a perfect strike. The heavy brass bass hit the man square in the chest, knocking the wind out of him. The gun fired, the bullet shattering a bust of Thurgood Marshall on the shelf behind her. Denise didn't wait. She kicked off her heels and ran. She sprinted through the stacks, weaving through the maze of books. She knew this library better than anyone. She reached the fire alarm on the north wall and pulled it. The sirens wailed, a deafening shriek that filled the building. The sprinklers erupted, dousing the library in water. The assassin cursed, scrambling to get up, but the element of surprise was gone. Security guards were already yelling from the floor below. He turned and fled toward the service exit. Denise slumped against the wall, water dripping down her face, mixing with the sweat of adrenaline. She was alive, but they had tried to kill her in a place of law. This was no longer a legal battle. It was war. And Denise Harper was done playing defense. The morning sun rose over a city that had no idea how close it was to an explosion. Denise had not gone home. She had gone to the one place the corruption couldn't reach. The federal building, specifically the office of the U.S. Attorney, Ethan Park. Park was young, ambitious, and incorruptible. He had been Denise's clerk. "You look like hell, Justice," Park said, handing her a cup of black coffee. She was wearing a hoodie she had borrowed from the Lost and Found, her expensive suit ruined by the sprinklers. "They tried to kill me, Ethan," she said flatly. "Alderman Kane, Sentinel Corrections." Park looked at the file she had spread out on his conference table. This is treason against the public trust." "But, Denise, Kane is powerful. If we move on him, we need to be bulletproof. Do we have a witness? Documents can be shredded. We need a voice." "We have a witness," Denise said. "We just need to get to him before they do." "Who?" "Jamal Thompson." Park looked confused. "The kid? What does he know?" "He doesn't know what he knows," Denise said. "I reviewed the transcript of his arrest. Jamal mentioned that while he was being transported, the officers stopped to meet someone. He heard a name. He heard a transaction." Denise stood up. "Kane's men will be looking for me. They won't be looking for Jamal yet. They think he's just a pawn. I need a tactical team." "You want to raid a housing project?" Park asked. "No," Denise said, her eyes cold. "I want to raid a fundraiser." The Civic Future Fund was holding a gala luncheon at a historic hotel downtown. It was a room full of Philadelphia's elite developers, politicians, and judges. Alderman Kane was at the podium, smiling, accepting a plaque for community service. "We are building a safer Philadelphia," Kane bellowed to applause. "A city where our youth are corrected, not coddled." The doors to the ballroom burst open. It wasn't the police. It was Denise Harper. She was back in her judicial robes. She walked down the center aisle, followed not by a bailiff, but by U.S. Marshals and a team of FBI agents. The music stopped. The applause died. Kane froze at the podium. "Justice Harper," Kane said, his smile tight. "This is a private event." Denise walked up the stairs to the stage. She took the microphone from his hand. "There is no such thing as private when you are spending stolen public money, Alderman," she said, her voice amplified through the massive speakers. The crowd murmured. Phones came out. Live streams started. "What is the meaning of this?" Kane demanded, reaching for her arm. A marshal stepped in between them, hand on his weapon. Denise turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're eating lunch paid for by the incarceration of innocent children. This man, Victor Kane, along with Judge Harlan Brooks and Ronald Blake, has orchestrated a scheme to fill private prisons for profit." "Lies," Kane screamed. "She's senile. Get her off the stage." "I have the receipts," Denise said, holding up a flash drive. "But more importantly, I have a guest." She gestured to the side stage. Ethan Park walked out, guiding a nervous Jamal Thompson. Denise looked at Kane. "Jamal, tell these people what you heard the night you were arrested, when Officer Hernandez stopped the car behind the old warehouse." Jamal looked at the sea of faces. He was terrified, but he looked at Denise, and he saw the woman who had saved his life. He stepped to the mic. I was in the back," Jamal said, his voice shaking. "The officer met a man, a big man like him." He pointed at Kane. "The big man gave the officer an envelope. He said, make sure Brooks gets the new batch. We have beds to fill." The room gasped. "Beds to fill," Denise repeated. "They weren't arresting criminals. They were filling inventory." Kane lunged. "You little rat!" He didn't make it 2 steps. 3 FBI agents tackled him to the ground. The podium crashed over. The crowd screamed. Ronald Blake, trying to sneak out the back exit, was intercepted by agents waiting by the kitchen. Denise stood over Kane as he was handcuffed. The flashbulbs were blinding now. "You're done, Victor," she said. "And Harlan is done. And the system that let you think you were gods, I'm burning that down too." She looked at the camera of a news crew that had rushed to the front. "My name is Justice Denise Harper," she said to the lens and to the world. "And let this be a warning to every judge, every politician, and every officer who thinks their badge is a shield for bigotry. We are watching and we are coming for you." The trial of the century did not begin with a bang, but with a slow, suffocating pressure that descended upon the federal building. The plaza outside the courthouse was packed. There were protesters holding signs that read, "Justice for Jamal," and "Clean the house," standing shoulder to shoulder with news crews from every major network in the country. Denise Harper watched the scene from the window of the U.S. Attorney's office. She wasn't wearing her judicial robes today. She was wearing a cream-colored suit, a deliberate choice. She wasn't here as a judge. She was here as a witness, and she wanted to look like the light cutting through the darkness. "Are you ready, Justice?" Ethan Park asked, adjusting his tie. He looked older than he had. The weight of the case, United States versus Kane, Brooks, et al., rested entirely on his shoulders. "I've been ready," she replied, turning away from the window. "Let's go finish this." The courtroom was a cavern of tension. When Denise entered, the gallery went silent. On the left side sat the families of the victims, hundreds of parents whose children had been fed into the Kids for Cash machine. On the right, a phalanx of high-priced defense attorneys sat like vultures waiting for a carcass. And there, at the defendant's table, sat the architects of the misery. Alderman Victor Kane looked diminished. Without his entourage, without his podium, he was just a heavy-set man in an ill-fitting suit, sweating under the fluorescent lights. But it was Harlan Brooks who drew Denise's eye. The former judge was unrecognizable. The arrogance that had once radiated from him like heat was gone, replaced by a hollow, trembling fear. He refused to look at the gallery. He stared at his hands, which were shaking uncontrollably. The trial lasted weeks, a grueling parade of evidence that peeled back the layers of corruption in Philadelphia County. Ethan Park was surgical. He didn't just present facts. He told a story of greed. He displayed the Icarus files on the massive courtroom monitors. Jurors watched in stunned silence as email chains were revealed. Casual conversations between Kane and Brooks discussing human beings as inventory and units. "We need more units to hit the bonus bracket." One email from Brooks read, "I'll see what I can sweep up from South Philadelphia," was Kane's reply. You could hear a pin drop. The banality of the evil was what made it so terrifying. They weren't discussing monsters. They were discussing teenagers who had been caught with marijuana or truant from school. But the turning point, the moment that would be replayed in law schools for decades, came when Denise Harper took the stand. Brooks's defense attorney, a sleek shark named Philip Vance, tried to discredit her. He tried to paint her investigation as a personal vendetta, a breach of judicial protocol. "Justice Harper," Vance sneered, pacing in front of the jury box. "Is it not true that you entered Judge Brooks's courtroom without identifying yourself? That you essentially spied on a colleague? Is that honorable conduct?" Denise sat in the witness box, her posture regal. She leaned into the microphone. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice smooth and cool as a river stone. "I did not spy, I observed. And what I observed was not a colleague administering the law. I observed a predator hunting in a cage he built himself. Protocol is designed to protect the integrity of the court. When the court has no integrity, protocol is just a hiding place for criminals." Vance faltered. "But you humiliated him." "He humiliated himself," Denise countered, her eyes locking onto Brooks. "He humiliated the Constitution. I merely turned on the lights." Vance sat down. He knew he had lost. Then came the final nail: Jamal Thompson. When Jamal walked to the stand, he didn't look like a victim. He wore a crisp shirt and tie. He had been working with a speech therapist, gaining confidence. He told the jury about the cold of the holding cell. He told them about the fear of losing his future for a crime he didn't commit. "I thought my life was over," Jamal said, his voice trembling slightly but never breaking. Judge Brooks looked at me and he laughed. He didn't see a student. He didn't see a son. He saw a paycheck. Jamal pointed a finger across the room. "He sold me." Brooks finally looked up. For a fleeting second, his eyes met Jamal's. In that exchange, the power dynamic that had existed in courtroom 302 was completely inverted. The boy was the giant. The judge was the insect. Brooks looked away, defeated. The jury deliberated. When the foreman read the verdicts, the room felt like it was vibrating. On the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant, Victor Kane, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to deprive civil rights, we find the defendant, Harlan Brooks, guilty, count after count. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The sentencing hearing was the final act. Judge Margaret Ellison, a woman known for her icy demeanor, did not mince words. She addressed Kane first. "You sold your city for silver," she told him. "You are sentenced to years in federal prison." Then she turned to Brooks. "Mr. Brooks," Judge Ellison said, peering over her glasses, "you committed the ultimate sin for a jurist. You confirmed the worst fears of the marginalized, that the system is rigged against them. You are a disgrace to the robe." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "I sentence you to years. And I recommend that you be placed in a facility where you can reflect on the dignity of labor." Brooks collapsed into his chair, sobbing. The gavel banged, a sound of finality that echoed like a thunderclap. Winter had turned to a humid, sticky summer. Denise sat on her porch, sipping iced tea. The mail had just arrived. Among the bills and charity solicitations was a plain white envelope with a federal prison return address. It was from the warden of a low-security federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania. Denise opened it. Inside was a short note and a photograph. "Justice Harper, I thought you might appreciate seeing that we treat everyone equally here." Denise looked at the photo. It was a grainy, candid shot taken in the prison mess hall. In the center of the frame was Harlan Brooks. The expensive Italian suits were gone, replaced by a baggy stained gray jumpsuit. His hair, once perfectly coiffed, was buzzed short. He was holding a mop. He was standing next to a tipped-over bucket of soapy water, looking down at a puddle of grime on the cafeteria floor. His face was twisted in a grimace of exhaustion and humiliation. The man who had sneered at Denise, calling her a janitor, telling her the bench was not for the help, was now spending his days scrubbing floors for convicted felons. Denise didn't laugh. It wasn't funny. It was precise. It was the universe balancing the equation with a mathematical elegance. He was finally learning the lesson she had tried to teach him on day one. That there is dignity in all work. But there is no dignity in looking down on it. She placed the photo on the table. "Clean floors, Harlan," she whispered. "Maybe it'll help clean your soul." The scars on the city began to heal, replaced by new growth. On a bright Tuesday morning, Denise stood in the back of a renovated warehouse in South Philadelphia. The sign above the door read, "The Denise Harper Legal Defense Center." She had named it after her mother. The room was buzzing with activity. Idealistic young lawyers were huddled around desks, taking calls, drafting motions, fighting for the people who couldn't fight for themselves. Denise watched from the podium at the front of the room. A young man was finishing his speech to the new class of interns. "We do not judge by appearance," the young man said, his voice booming with authority. "We do not judge by bank accounts. We judge by the content of the character and the facts of the law. We are the shield for those who have none." It was Jamal Thompson. He was in law school at Northwestern, top of his class. He radiated a confidence that brought tears to Denise's eyes. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a leader. As the applause erupted, Denise slipped out the back door. She didn't need the accolades. She needed to close the circle. She hailed a cab and gave the driver the address. The old courthouse hadn't changed much on the outside. It was still a fortress of gray stone. But inside the air felt different, lighter. Denise walked the familiar halls until she reached courtroom 302. She pushed the heavy oak doors open. The court was in recess. The room was empty. The lights were dimmed. She walked down the center aisle, her heels clicking on the linoleum, the same sound that had annoyed Brooks all those years ago. She walked past the bar, past the defense table, and stood before the judge's bench. She ran her hand along the wood. It was just wood. It wasn't a throne. It was a tool. She looked at the spot on the floor where she had stood that first day, dripping wet, clutching her portfolio, being laughed at by a man who thought he was a god. She felt a presence then. Not a ghost, but a memory. The smell of bleach and lemon cleaner. The sound of a heavy bucket being dragged across the floor. The image of her mother on her knees, scrubbing this very floor so that her daughter could one day stand above it. Denise closed her eyes. "I did it, Mama," she whispered into the silence. "I didn't just clean the floor. I took out the trash." A sense of profound peace settled over her shoulders. She turned around and walked out of courtroom 302, leaving the door wide open behind her so the light could finally get in. And that is the incredible story of how one woman turned a moment of disrespect into a revolution. It's a powerful reminder that you should never judge a book by its cover, and you certainly should never judge a woman by her coat. Justice Denise Harper didn't just win a case. She dismantled a corrupt system and proved that true power isn't about how loud you can shout, but how tall you can stand when it matters most. Never underestimate the quiet power that lives inside every person you meet, because the woman you dismiss as ordinary today might be the one who changes everything tomorrow. In that crowded Philadelphia courtroom, Judge Harlan Brooks made the fatal mistake so many of us still make. He judged a soaked trench coat, a simple bun, and a calm demeanor, never imagining the extraordinary strength and moral courage standing right in front of him. What he saw as weakness was actually wisdom forged in years of watching her own mother scrub those same courthouse floors so her daughter could one day rise above them. What he mocked as insignificance was actually the steady, unstoppable force of justice, wrapped in quiet dignity. That single moment of cruel laughter didn't just humiliate one person. It lit a fire that eventually burned down an entire corrupt system. It reminds us that true power isn't loud, arrogant, or dressed in fine robes. Real power is patient, principled, and often arrives wearing the clothes of someone you'd never expect. It teaches us that every human being carries invisible stories, invisible battles, and invisible greatness. The stranger in line, the coworker you overlook, the person society tries to shrink. Any one of them could be carrying a light strong enough to expose darkness and restore hope for hundreds of others. So the next time you feel tempted to look down on someone because of how they look, where they come from, or what they seem to have, pause. Choose kindness instead. Choose respect. Because the universe has a beautiful, sometimes fierce way of balancing the scales. And the person you belittle today may be the very one who reminds the world what real justice and real character look like. What about you? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment when someone you underestimated turned out to be far more powerful than anyone realized? Or has a simple act of disrespect ever sparked a bigger change in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story touched your heart and reminded you to see the hidden strength in others, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss these powerful, true-to-life tales of courage, justice, and the quiet victories that matter most. Thank you for watching. Be kind out there. You never know whose life you're touching or whose quiet power you're standing in front of.